Hey everyone, welcome. So this is part 2 of my April astrology. Kind of giving you a heads up of what's to come. Today is April the 15th, and I want to start with April the 15th. So today Mercury entered into Aries, and so far what we've seen is Trump threatening to fire Powell again. Trump sends Reports are up to 10,000 more troops to the Middle East. The Senate, again, blocked efforts to end the war with Iran. The Pentagon announces that they plan to ramp up plans of military operations in Cuba. And Democrats file a 25th Amendment agenda against Trump via starting a commission, my understanding is. So that's so far as of this recording of what's happened today. So let's get into April 17th. We've got Mercury conjunct Neptune in Aries. And so Mercury rules perception, cognition, and communication with definitions and boundaries, whereas Neptune is the opposite. Aries is all about action. So what could go wrong, right? So what can we expect from this? Well, what we will most likely see is quick, impulsive communications that is so far from reality that it will lead to confusion, unrealistic expectations, and lots of misinformation. So be very cautious of what you hear and believe because of what someone else is saying, and be careful of what you say too, because it could be difficult, because it's going to be fast energy, it's fire. It's going to be extremely important to ensure that you're grounding yourself, your energy, as this will be an extraordinary amount of fire energy. So for spirituality and artistic people, this is going to be a perfect day to play hooky if you can and indulge in reading something new that actually challenges your current belief system, or doing something actively, creatively, that you've never done before, like painting, drawing, pottery, right? Crocheting, you know, writing in a journal, a book, something like that. I do want to say that we can expect some problems with communication, electrical systems. So we can expect to see problems on everything that's run through the internet. And also, there's an extraordinary amount of crazy energy happening outside of Earth right now that isn't normal. So this definitely is pointing to possible problems with all the programs that run through the internet. So, if you need cash, you might get some in advance just to have some, because there may be problems with ATMs and the banking system, all kinds of stuff like that. Also, there's a new moon on the 17th in Aries. And this new moon is going to feel like the most powerful and rememberable new moon for 2026. And this is because we will have 6 planets all in Aries. So we have 6 planets all in fire. We've got the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, and Neptune. It's just going to be an extraordinary amount of energy that day. That's why I say it's really, really important to stay grounded. And if you can play hooky this day, and just, it is a Friday, so maybe you can play hooky and just do something fun with your family or your friends. So remember, with a new moon, we don't have all the information that we need yet to make a decision to move forward. But just go by your instincts and don't take action yet. Instead, do something fun or artistic. Okay, before I go into what I am seeing on April 19th, when we have Mars and Saturn conjunct exactly at 7 degrees. We also have Mercury at 6 degrees, all of this in Aries. Plus, we've got Venus at 24 degrees in Taurus and Uranus at 29 degrees in Taurus. So, before I talk about this Mars Saturn with Mercury influence in Aries on April 19th, let's hear what some other astrologers are saying.
So, what happens when you put Mars and Saturn together? You might think, oh, there's a conflict or there's a fight or something along those lines. But that's not really an accurate description, because if there were a conflict or a fight, then we would be looking at something like a square. You've got one side that's fighting with another side, but they're here together. So there's no distance between the two of them. So what's really going on here, if you combine the idea of the urgency and the wanting to winness of Mars with the resistance and the withholding and the doubt and not being sure that's ever really going to happen of Saturn, what you have when you put these two planets together is the idea of a struggle.
So what I want to talk about today is what makes the meeting of Mars and Saturn traditionally just difficult, as well as what might make this specific iteration in Aries even more difficult. So first of all, when the malefics get together, you have two planets that represent some of the natural parts of life. They're not unnatural, they're not evil, they're not bad, they're not a mistake. They're parts of life. Death, for example, is part of life. Winter, old age, decay, disease, things falling apart, limitations, all Saturnian realities that are a basic part of every mystical tradition on the planet. Impermanence, death, the limitations of form and time. That's what Saturn represents. But Saturn does not represent those things literally. Saturn points to their reality, and traditionally Saturn points to what lay beyond. So if you have a deep understanding of impermanence, then you have a great understanding of eternity. There is an interconnection between those two things, which is why Saturn was traditionally a planet associated with mysticism. Now, like, for example, one of the most Saturnian cards in the tarot is the Hermit. The Hermit is a great example of a kind of monastic Saturnian monk who has a little bit of distance from the world and is able to see it objectively because they understand impermanence, they understand suffering, and so forth. Well, Saturn's not a bad guy, but Saturn does represent some of those hard realities, the concrete reality of death, the concrete reality of aging, the concrete realities of limitation and suffering. Now, Mars, on the other hand, tends to represent, for example, desire, but kind of stemming from the root of Mars as desire is conflict and passion and intensity and dominance and violence even. So when you put these two planets together, you often have some of the more difficult qualities of human life sort of blended together as one. What makes this unique in the sign of Aries is that Mars is greatly empowered while Saturn is greatly debilitated. And so a debilitated Saturn meeting up with a powerful Mars can be a very unique situation where some of the themes we're going to go through today are specific to this meeting and why this could be one of the more difficult transits of the year. It's not that Mars and Saturn are just out to screw you over either. So I'm going to try to give you some constructive things to look for in what might be a more challenging sequence of events astrologically. And who knows what the most difficult of anything of a year or like is. You know, in a way, it's sort of generic to try to determine what a most difficult transit is in a year. However, I will say that when I make my list and I highlight transits of the year that are difficult, I feel like I've pretty reliably been able to pinpoint some of the more frustrating or challenging moments of the year. However, I will also say that those moments are often some of the most, what do I want to call it, growth-oriented moments of the year. So I try to represent that when I talk about difficult transits on the channel. Let's get into it.
We have Mars catching up to Saturn. And here at noon on the 19th, we can see that Mars at noon is at 7 degrees of Aries, 45 minutes. Saturn is at 7 degrees Aries, 51 minutes. Mars actually perfects its conjunction with Saturn at 3:43 p.m., but we're going to be feeling this all day. And it's a good day to slow down, to take action that is considered, that is authentic, that is real, but doesn't overextend, because I think again we're going to, if we've overextended in the past, we're going to meet our limitations now, especially as the moon, just before it moves into Gemini, and the moon moving into Gemini occurs at 9:17 a.m., but just prior to that, over the hour prior to that, the moon will catch up to Uranus and can electrically release some tension. And so I think that we have this kind of things happening, but we want to again slow things down and make things last. I think this is just an incredibly potent period of time, especially if we move ahead to the 20th. We can see now that the moon is in mid Gemini. The sun moves into Taurus. It actually does that in the evening of the 19th, with that Mars conjunct Saturn. There's a real sense of, on the 19th, of the energy slowing down and getting real, sinking in, maybe having the realization that some of these things that we thought would just come and go ain't going away. They're here to stay. We have to deal with the new realities. The sun moving into Taurus kind of takes the hectic, helter-skelter growth of the new greens in the beginning of spring, the burst of life forward, and in a way, the sun moving into Taurus at 6:39 p.m. says, again, slow down, make it real, make it last. And then by the 20th, we have Mercury catching up to Saturn, as Mars did yesterday on the 19th. And on the 20th, the Mercury Saturn conjunction says, you need, we need, I need to speak the truth. No more bullshit, no more pie in the sky, no more Neptune dreaming. Oh, it's all there still. But right now, we're forced to say what's real, and to keep our thoughts in a realm that is so real. But we have to be careful about becoming so stubborn and entrenched in what we think is real, when in fact we have I used the word real often enough here? When in fact we really need to readjust our thoughts based upon the facts and the truths that we're learning now, rather than forcing or ourselves, or holding a position of holding on to something that's just simply no longer valid. I mean, we have three planets within a degree of one another, and that's Mercury, it's Saturn, Mercury, and Mars. They're all so close together that our actions have to be based upon fact, upon truth, and reality, because it's Saturn, again, creating the boundaries that we need to respect. This is all on Monday, April 20th. The moon.
Hey, so today is April 18th, and I am so sorry it's taking me a while to finish this silly video. Well, it's not silly, but we have been under some really horrendous tornado weather the last few days, and so I haven't been able to record this. Anyway, this is going to affect us tonight and tomorrow. This Mars, Saturn, and Mercury conjunction, and Mercury's only 1 degree orb away, so Mercury's going to play a huge part in this, even though Mars and Saturn will be conjunct. So I want to talk about the last time we saw this Mars and Saturn together in Aries, which was March 3rd, 1968, and it was at 11 degrees in Aries. And the most important thing here is that it was, we were still in Vietnam, right? And what actually happened on March the 3rd was an ending came to the most, the biggest, what they call war theater of the entire offense in Vietnam, and it's called the Tet Offense. And historians have actually called it the worst intelligence in American history, next to Pearl Harbor. And of course, now we have 9/11. So at the time, it was considered just as bad as Pearl Harbor. So, anyway, let me explain what happened and what brought to the end. The North Vietnamese People's Army of Vietnam and the Viet Cong launched a surprise attack on January 30th, 1968, against the South Vietnamese Army of the Republic of Vietnam and the United States of America, along with their allies, targeting military and civilian command and control centers throughout South Vietnam. And up to this battle, the United States government had been greatly gaslighting and propagandizing the war back here at home to the people about what was going on, and basically telling them that they pretty much won the war and that Viet Cong in no way could form a huge attack like what happened on March or January 30th. And so what happened was they made this attack, and there were media reporters all across Vietnam, and they were filming the attacks. And so these videos were coming back home instantly, to Americans, which just I put the American public in, you know, really being beyond angry. And that was because the taxes were raised, tariffs, the gas was on the increase, and of course they were doing a draft. And so when they find out that this huge attack happened and that it looked like we were getting cremated, right? They were furious, absolutely furious. Now, what happened was over 2,600 U.S. troops were killed, with over 10,000 wounded during this entire 30-day battle. And as I told you, historians call this battle one of the worst intelligence failures in American history, next to Pearl Harbor. And of course, now we have 9/11. So the entire Vietnam War was from 1955 to 1975, and a total of 58,279 U.S. military lives were lost, with over 300,000 wounded. And as of 2021, there is still over 1,500 Americans that are still listed as missing in action. So what this is like 1 in 10 Americans who served became a casualty. Now, 2.2 American men were drafted into the military service during the Vietnam War, and the draft eligible pool that they pulled from was 27 million. Now, what's interesting is 15 million men were granted deferments for such things as education, health, and other reasons like bone spurs. So, what happened on March 3rd during this alignment was that they made an agreement with Viet Cong to stop. There was an agreement to come together to stop. We're kind of already seen that in the last couple of days, where Trump is boasting about having made an agreement with Iran, and and yet Iran is saying that the agreement was already broken hours after the Americans agreed to it. So, think about, well, what is, this huge defeat that we had happen on March 3rd brought this to an ending, right? This 30-day battle to an ending. But of course, the war didn't stop, right? Because it goes on until 1975. So what we see here is, 7 years the war has continued after this battle of the Tet offense. So we can kind of expect similarity happening with the alignment that's going to happen tomorrow. However, I believe it's going to be much different. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we've also got Mercury and Neptune and the Sun in Aries. And I think with Neptune there, it's, you know, um, Neptune is going to put down this illusion of things, are over or we're winning, et cetera, and when in fact there's going to be a huge loss. And when I say loss, I mean a loss of life. And I'm saying that because for we the people, this again is going to hit our fifth house, which is the house of children, the house of joy, the house of pleasure. We've got this new moon coming in tonight, and then, tomorrow, this conjunction happening. So I really, I don't think this, they might say this is an ending to the war, but it's not gonna be. It's just gonna be an ending to a particular battle that they're doing, where they got defeated. And I think what's going to come out of this is we're going to find out there were a lot more casualties since they began this offense February 28th than what they've led on to. I think that's what we're going to discover by having Mercury and Neptune in Aries. I think it's going to get leaked. And so I think that people are going to be really upset. So I want to explain just a little bit more about the shadow side of why I'm coming up with this, because Donald Trump has been breaking the Constitution. So what he's been doing has been using the shadow side of the energy of the planets and the signs. And so the shadow side of Mars in Aries often brings extreme impulsiveness, which leads to mistakes that generate unnecessary conflict, which, of course, we've already been seeing this. And the shadow side of Saturn in Aries often brings a feeling of restriction in the ability to act confidently, and may take on fear to initiate for the fear of failing or not being confident enough. So the shadow side of Mercury in Aries is quick in thinking with a tendency to immediately act on ideas. However, it can manifest as impulsiveness in thinking, leading to hasty conclusions or speaking without considering the impact of words. And of course, we've been seeing this as well for some time. So, Neptune's shadow in Aries can manifest toward impulsiveness and directionless action. Self deception here may actually center on a false belief of invulnerability, which can lead to taking unnecessary risk or fighting for immediate causes that are unrealistic. And so the sun shadow can take on the form of excessive aggression and selfishness. So, again, with this stellium of Mercury, Mars, Saturn in Aries, it's going to be sextiling to the government's natal chart AC, which is the first house, which will be easy energy for them to show their true colors of who they are and what they've been doing. And for the stellium of Mercury, Mars, Saturn in Aries, squaring to their natal Mars in Cancer, it's going to give them challenges in their actions related to the day, work, co-workers, and subordinates. And so I know that we've been seeing military troops or individuals, leaving, resigning, going AWOL, refusing to participate in the war. And I think it's just going to keep growing. With this stellium, it may actually really break wide open. Um, so for the stellium to their DC in Leo, this will be a trine aspect. So what we could see are agreements falling apart again, which we're already seeing, and we could also learn about relationships, negotiations, or contracts with our open enemies, which I totally think we're going to see. Um, and the stellium to their Mercury in Virgo will be in conjunct, which we also call that a quincunx, which will be very difficult for them to communicate properly. It's going to be really hard for them to hide information. Um, this is where Donald will certainly probably blurt out things we didn't know, not meaning to, but his mouth is going to run faster than his brain. So we literally could see more extreme of this communication and learning information about who really has power and control. We could learn a lot about where the money's being spent, how the money's being spent, as well as we could learn about deaths, because the eighth house is all about death. Um, and so this stellium to their moon and asteroid Niobe in Sagittarius of the 11th house is going to be a trine aspect. So I think what we're going to see are more emotional rants happening. I also think that this is going to be focused more on friends, groups, group memberships. It could be an exposure as well. Um, and this would be something that the whole world is going to witness, okay? It's not just us Americans, the whole world is seeing this. So, this stellium energy is going to occur directly over their third house. Therefore, it's going to greatly affect their communications and mindset. For us, we the people, this energy is going to be directly over our fifth house. So, therefore, it's going to greatly affect our joy, our pleasure, our children, and even our creative expression. And just for a quick heads up, on our 250th birthday, July 4th, um, I just want you to know that 8 of the 10 planets are going to be in air and fire. So I want you to take great caution if you're making plans for this day. Most notably is that the Sun and Mercury, who will be in retrograde, Mercury, who's going to be in retrograde, will be in Cancer. So there could be a lot of transportation issues happening, communication issues, money problems. Also, huge note here, Mars and Uranus are going to be conjunct in Gemini, um, which can bring out a lot of unexpected problems with, again, electronics, electrical systems. Okay, so I will do a more in depth as we get closer. But if you're making plans, to go celebrate this, I just want you to be careful when you're doing that, because there could be transportation problems, there could be, ATM, bank problems, getting money. Just keep these things in mind when you're making your arrangements. And just as an FYI, the last time that this happened was August 5th, 1947. And these are a few things that I found on Wikipedia. As you can see, there was a conflict happening that came to an end. So Mars and Uranus actually seem to somewhat end conflicts, but as you can see, it also can start them.